just as terrible
No,
as you
it's
are.
because now I'm using a laptop I don't normally use, but yes, you may continue. I'm trying to just
All
sort out
right,
the screen side.
let me continue. Swept, should I just start again? Let me just start again. Just another stained glass cup. Once again, he broke himself on the concrete ground. What remained were the scattered remains of a glass unfound. Fragmented pieces of a colorless glass cup lay motionless on the asphalt, ensconced in a mixture of iced tea and syrup. Glass, which was once just cracked from repeated misuse, abuse left it depleted and reduced. It could no longer hold any substance or fluid. Its delicate constitution shattered and ruined. Swept up by his own indecisive mind, his unsteady hand let it slip from the cusp of an unopened mouth. It lay mutilated on the ground, unsure if the fall actually made a sound. He observed the fate of all who worshipped his compounded lies. Who will fix it if he proves to be useless? Who will save it from being shoved back into a furnace? Who will prevent it from being turned into a glass container or made into a mirror to reflect someone else's perfection? Perhaps he'll just be another stained glass cup, chemically enhanced because natural beauty is not enough. Right. So, like I said, with just another stained glass cup, I want to explain a little more. So hopefully during the Q&A, someone can please remind me, and I'll explain why I included it in the poems for tonight. Whew. Yeah, anywhere but home. This one is a poem actually about my father, who wasn't there. When I wrote this poem, it's before I actually got any information as to who he was. I recently found out the last couple of years more about his story. Um, but this was written many, many years ago before I knew anything. So it was just me venting about how I how I interpret his leaving. He didn't actually leave in this way. It's just how I interpreted it. So it's called Anywhere But Here. The day he left, there was no celebration, no fanfare, no farewell. Only a suitcase stuffed with wrinkled clothes and his hope for the nightmare to be over. There were no paper plates at his non-party, no plastic forks or polystyrene cups, or those colorful serviettes on the side. There were no slaughtered sheep or cows, or even chakalaka and bab, only an empty bed where the father should lie. The day he left, there were no weeping goggles or aunties and dukes slaving away on a twin hot plate. There were no elders or uncles circled around shaded corners, complaining about the good old days while sharing imbaba. There were no young boys playing football on dirt roads or young girls shouting, one, two, three, and an ele with a skipping rope. Only the high-pitched cry of a muted goodbye lingered about. The day my father left, there was no celebration, no fanfare, no farewell, only a picture frame bordering a child's imagination because my father's destination was anywhere but here. Yeah. Uh, like I said, this one makes me a little emotional because, yeah, I didn't really know him. This was just, I guess, the idea that a child has formulates in their mind when their parent isn't there and they don't really get too much information as to who the person was. So this is what I created for myself. And then, ooh, my skin. With this one, I actually have a track I was hoping I can play for you guys. Um, I actually worked with a producer friend of mine. His name is Verdigris, and he helped me bring this poem to life. So I'll play the track, and then afterwards I'll read the poem. Okay.
Is the track playing? Happy is the track playing?
No, can't hear anything.
We don't hear anything on our side.
Can you hear the track?
No, we
Or
can't
am I
hear.
just,
You
oh,
just
no.
play. Yeah.
Oh, why didn't you say so? Oh, that's so
Like that's why
embarrassing. I was busy
I asked.
hearing.
No, we don't hear
Oh, no.
anything.
Oh, that's terrible. And I don't know how to share it. So I'll just have to read it out loud. My
What is the
apologies.
track?
It's for this poem, My
Is it
Skin.
something that I can
But
find on YouTube?
no, no, no. It's just a
Okay.
track that he and I just made. We haven't released it.
Oh,
But
okay.
I'll send it afterwards, after the session,
All right.
if you
Awesome.
guys want to read it,
Yeah.
if
Okay.
you want to
Thank
listen to
you.
it. Okay. Oh, that's so embarrassing. Why didn't you stop me? I was busy chatting out here by myself. Okay. So, um, this poem's called My Skin. Who, with this one, I wrote this poem whilst here in China. And yeah, it's not what most people think. People think that I'm writing this about black and white, but most the poem is actually about colorism. That's what I was going for. But let me read it to you, and yeah, hopefully you can get your own ideas. So, my skin is not a sin. My skin is not a signature. It does not lend credence to your beliefs or authorization to your prejudice. It is not an invitation for comments during your delineated dinner party conversations. My skin has feelings, emotions that surpass your reductionist views of what it means to carry the weight of this pigment. The world judges, mocks, and stares. And the second my face shows evidence of despair, then am indignant. Why? Because the fault is more yours than mine. And I wonder at times if in some other world we were both lions and we crossed paths. Would you declare you were of a separate, superior breed? Would you claim your mane was more lustrous than mine as you proceed with fangs drawn from the sheath toward me? Would you start biting at my hide? Would you muster up your pride and attack solely based on your bias? Of course. And of that, I have no doubt, because our minority reports are evidence of your violence. Although we still fight for equality, we do not fight for your likeness. With melanin so rich embedded in our skin, we have no desire for your lightness. All right. So, like I said, with this poem, I wrote while I was here in China, and it's not meant to be black versus white. It's actually more towards colorism. And it's not only colorism between black people and white people or black people and Asian people. It's within the black community, we also have colorism. So that's what this was touching on. Right. And then the next one I have is Loving the Broken Places. So I wrote this poem after I'd written My Skin is Not a Sin. This was basically just a way for me to, I guess, try to rebuild myself. There was a time where things felt heavy, felt dark, I felt ostracized, I felt judged all the time. And I just realized that I needed to start loving my own broken places. So, loving the broken places. Sometimes the people we love don't know how to love all of our broken places, all of the neglected crevasses and creases where we hide our true shame. Readers, though they may try, they cannot unfurl parchment so delicate and ancient that it would disintegrate at the novel sound of an "I love you," or burst into flames if a matchstick love were to come along and proclaim, "You can trust me, I won't hurt you." Sometimes the people we love don't know how to handle our empty spaces. All the stock photo picture frames stockpiled and lined up on our makeshift mantelpiece, which we constructed, our childhood traumas, capturing the happiness we always feared we may never have ourselves. Sometimes the people we love don't know how to save us from ourselves. The shells they constantly need to tiptoe over just in case a misstep may lead to a broken ego, or even worse, a lifeless one. So, like medical surgeons, they cauterize our bleeding pasts, disinfect our vivid nightmares, and thread and stitch back together an entire being. Sometimes the people we love know exactly how we need to be loved. Sometimes it is us who cannot see how we need to be loved. All right. Like I said, when I wrote this poem, it was a dark time in my travels here in China. So I needed something, yeah, to pretty much pull me back together because I felt broken inside because of everything that was happening. Oh, and then we get to one of my favorites, the Maiden's Thorns. So the Maiden's Thorns, it comes from years of being single. Yeah, and you kind of have this dream in your head that after all of the hardship that you've gone through, that one day you'll find your way back to perhaps someone you've known in the past. And when you find them, it just clicks for the both of you. So this one is called The Maiden's Thorns. She stands before this boy she's always known. She stands rooted in the earth in their favorite spot amongst the orchids, and his fingers begin to carefully examine her own. Like an expert florist, his touch brings to life the cracked lines between the two bouquets she calls palms. In his gaze, he holds two bouquets of 5 roses. She winces. Although his touch is delicate and most gentle, his brow is fierce. The feel of him navigates its way up and down her every high and low peak, travels beneath every inch of her being. He looks distant. His discerning eyes take stock of each tear in her fabric. In his mind, over time, he catalogs every mole along the folds of her soul. She feels exposed, as if his judgment of her was shears, snipping away at her stem. And now the only story her body was telling is that she is a wilting rose, riddled with big thorns. He retreats for a moment. Her rose petals slowly wither on their vines. He extends his fingers to her and says, "Your turn. Can you see mine? Even though you've always known me, if you look very closely, you'll see that I too have been just as lonely." All right. I was being a little bit of a romantic there. There's this hope that one day, yeah, I might meet my soulmate in the same kind of way. So this is why I wrote this poem. It's the hope. It's the hope that one day, yeah, it will happen. And as I was thinking about the meeting, you also kind of have to think about the ending as well. So this poem I wrote, think, yeah, I wrote it actually after Maiden's Thorns, even though I got the Maiden's Thorns published after this poem. I'd actually written this one after I'd written the Maiden's Thorns. So this one is called Asked Me. You once asked me to write you a love song. Instead, I composed for you a symphony to capture your indelible spirit. Woodwinds like morning whispers, soft breaths on the nape of my neck, warm, soothing strings like lovers' hands, plucking gently at loose lashes and fingering my heartstrings, doting, pensive percussions like myocardial infarctions, intermittent heartbreaks, wailings, somber ululations rising in tandem with each kiss on the chest, lips, and the knowledge that each one precedes your imminent departure. You once begged me to write you a love song, to immortalize you when you cease to be. Well, this is it, because you can no longer come back to me. Yeah, like I said, with this poem, you asked me, I'd written it after the Maiden's Dawns, even though I published them, you know, out of sync, out of line. Yeah. And then the next poem I have is Beyond the Drakensberg Mountains. This is actually the second poem that I ever performed in front of an audience. I really love this poem. It's one of my favorites. Beyond the Drakensberg Mountains. There is a place beyond the Drakensberg Mountains where the sky blushes clouds of red velvet sponges, and the setting sun rests its head on the horizon's neck. A place where the cyclopean moon in full bloom refracts its gaze upon a dazzling lake, and the lake, a deluge of unabashed seduction, gyrates and swings her voluptuous hips between two beds. There is a place where the freckled night smiles for countless hours, and her breath tastes sweeter than the scent of a million wildflowers. A place where evergreen trees rise higher than the Tower of Babel, and their branches, engaged and intertwined, pledge an eternity to one another. There is a place where dawn sings her lullaby to the errant moon, conceals her freckled face with a foundation of violet. A place where wolves howl at high noon and goats swoon like damsels to the tune of proclaimed love. It is said that there is a place over the lurid rainbow where raindrops melt into seas of gold and diamonds, bountiful, are harvested like almonds. A place where saffron's perfume, pungent and bitter, fills the nostrils, and her delicate red hairs turn rivers blood orange. There is a place just beyond view where butterflies flutter like delicate kisses, the rings of queens and kings, and queens and kings look like you and I do. Oh, there is but such a place, paradise, forever receding before our eyes. So that was Beyond the Drakensberg Mountains. I performed this poem, I think the first time was 2 years ago. Still one of my favorites to perform. So whenever I perform here in Ningbo, it's one of the ones that I always go to because it reminds me a lot of home. And then the next one I have for you guys is Mama is Terminal. This one won first place for the Eco Poetry mini competition for the AVBOB Poetry Project. Yeah, it's actually done a lot of good things for me. With this poem, I actually managed to find like the students who wanted to be one of my students. Like I got new clients come in just because of winning the competition with this poem. So yeah, it's very dear to me. It's called Mama's Terminal. Mama's lungs have turned into charcoal clouds. Her volcanic mouth often spits out hot ash on cold nights and sometimes cries acid tears during the daytime. Mama's moods have been described as capricious and inconsistent. Though she is not bipolar, her disorder has been diagnosed and labeled as the changing of the seasons. All of our micro and radio waves have changed the temperament of Mama's very nature. She's no longer the same. She's changeable on any given day. We've caused her ferocious and scalding summers, celebrated her effervescent springs, criticized her melancholic autumns, and through our actions, earned her winter cold shoulders. Mama's body is still the place we call home, although our home is no longer the place she recognizes as her own body anymore. After millennia of degradation, largely due to our presence, she's undergone a drastic cosmetic transformation. We've electively augmented sections of her terrain, reinforced her natural skin with concrete and steel, nipped and tucked her abdomen at will, arched her facelift by turning her blemishes into landfills. Mama's deathbed soliloquy will be, my body feels more like war-torn zones or a playground than a home or sanctuary. All of those war games you all played in my backyard are no longer imagined. You're no longer lobbing stones, falling and breaking bones, or fencing with twigs and sticks. Instead, against this glass house, you've upgraded your fantasies to launching real-life atomic bricks against members of your own family. Yeah, so this poem was for the competition, and I wanted to personify what I think is happening to all that we live in. Yeah, the way that we pretty much mistreated the environment. I feel like if it were a human being, I think this is what she would say to us, how we've ruined, yeah, ruined her body. Um, then the second last poem that I have for you is Heliotropism. I wrote this poem last year, actually. Um, for last year, I hadn't been home for about 3 years. I'd been in China during the whole epidemic. Um, yeah, the whole epidemic here in China. I was stuck here and I couldn't come home. So this January was the first time I was able to come back to South Africa. So this was pretty much my writing about how much I miss being home. It's called heliotropism. I have longed to see the ocean blue skies, the iridescent stained glass clouds, and diamond encrusted African nights. I have dreamed once again seeing the barefooted youths and grazing sheep coalesce in the grassvelds, admiring the endless pews of yellow-tinted maize crops that extend across the escarpment, and inhaling deep the sugar-scented evening breeze kisses the skin at sunset. I have missed the feel of the home-baked textures of the coastal sands, the sun-dried smells of my grandmother's loving hands, and the summer roasted afternoons spent in the foothills, my homeland. Longed, I have dreamed, and oh, how I have missed, dancing in the gold-dusted fields amongst the cocoa-buttered flowers of the sun-clan. This this is a near and dear poem to me because it reminded me of home when I really needed a piece of home, when I couldn't come back. And when I got back home, it was pretty much the same. It was everything that I was expecting it to be. So whenever I miss home nowadays, I usually read this poem again. It gives me a sense of belonging in a way. And then the last poem that I have is called Lomlilo, or This Fire. This poem was actually inspired by my aunt. I was raised by my aunt, um, yeah, from a young age, from about 5 and upwards. So during my childhood, I always used to have these conversations with my aunt. She's like the best person you can ever receive advice from, but her advice is always so ambiguous. It always makes me laugh whenever I ask her for advice. It's never direct. So she always goes off on a tangent, and you're supposed to figure out what the advice is supposed to be. So in this scenario, I put a child and a mother together, and the child is simply asking whether or not fire is hot, and the mother gives him the most ambiguous answer you'll ever receive. So here it is, Mama, lomlilo. Mama, lomlilo yachisa. She responded, Danam, fire is nothing to fear. Fire burns in the passionate veins of our people, and the thunder of their doi echoes for generations to hear. Fire is the flavor of crackling skin, basted in revelry at family gatherings. It is the foundation of smoke in rendezvous homes, and the rite of passage at your initiation. Fire is stoked like the forgotten embers of forbidden lovers, and it gives rise to endless struggles. Mama, lumliluya sana. She responded, Mdanam, fire is nothing to despise. My eyes have seen cities die and from the ashes rose people's rights. Flaming tires have shed more light on crisis than boycotts, sit-ins, and campaigns of defiance. Kodwa mamela, my child, because what I say now may save your life. Fire is also the voice of warring guns and the piercing cry of deafening silence. Fire is nothing to fear. You must know this, my child. But remember, fire is still fire. All right. So, like I said, this poem was inspired by my aunt, an amazing woman, and her advice is timeless. It's very, very ambiguous, but timeless nonetheless. So, those were all the poems that I had for you guys for today. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Retshepisitswe, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And can we please unmute and give Tepi a big round of applause? This is the only time we get to be human in this space.
It
Thank you
was
so
nice. It was nice. It's daunting. Very
much.
daunting. It's an
Yeah, Zoom
experience. Wow.
readings are, they take a bit of getting
And
used
it,
to.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much for sharing that beautiful poetry.
yes, that's lovely.
Yeah, it was
Yes.
amazing, and my favorite personally, if I may be
Mm.
selfish, is a Drakensberg poem, Beyond the
Yes,
Drakensberg Mountains.
yes, the drops are lovely.
Yes, I enjoyed every bit of that. Maybe it's because I've got a little bit of KZN in me. Maybe it's
Yeah, probably. I'm thinking. I'm thinking.
I lived in
But
KZN for a bit, and like I love mountains. I
the
think the one thing that reminds me of home, like it's a mountain.
mountains, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same.
It's
It's the
the
same.
mountain.
Yeah, that's why I enjoy performing it as well. There's just something about it as well. It just reminds me of home. Like, I miss the mountains.
Yeah, like the mountains are something that are like extraordinary, and not just Drakensberg Mountains. I mean, I come from Eastern Cape originally too, and like always, it's the mountain. So, I
Yes,
thought the
yes.
reading was very nostalgic for me. I think listening to you kind of reminded me of my how I function as a poet. I think in many ways, and so this was
I appreciate it.
beautiful. And I'd like to open the space for questions before I take over. Ed, oh, immediately. Ed, the floor is yours.
Yeah, he told me that he had some comments, and I was like, I'm ready.
Yeah,
I'm
that hand
ready.
was
What do
so
you
quick.
Okay, well, it's nothing to worry about. Nothing to. Yeah, I really just had observations, and hey, you did it. I thank you, Chippy. Yeah. Okay. I do have a question.
Sure.
But the way that I think I will approach it is just to say, I found reading your poems and hearing you read them that you do a lot with structure. You do a lot with rhyme, with line breaks, with internal rhyme. Even the titles, the titles are very clear signposts. Um, yeah, they just everything works really well. So yeah, and there's a real range in the subject matter. So yeah, I mean, a poem like Beyond the Drakensberg Mountains, you simultaneously celebrate and lament this world that's passing before our eyes. Um, My skin is not a sin. You tackle optics, entrench prejudice, and then you've got something like, um, is it the one with the thorns? That's the maidens.
Maiden Stones.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's beautiful. It's just a beautiful, it's like a fable. Um, One feels it's the tension in that encounter, even if it's largely imagined, or if, as you say, it is imagined. But all of this rambling to just ask you about influences, and that's the one question. So who's influenced you? And living in China, you did say some of the poems have been written while you've been in China, and how has that affected your writing?
Well, it's a very good question. Well, let me start off with the influences. you might not like my answer, but initially, before I wrote poetry, I was actually a short story writer. So a lot of the poems that I write are actually, I think of them as prose, rhyming prose. So I think of them as actual stories, and then I just happen to make them rhyme into into poems because yeah, I grew up just reading a lot of novels. So I loved strange stories like Uncanny by Paul Jennings. I loved R.L. Stein, Goosebumps. These are all things that I loved, such imaginative sort of writing, and I've tried to like translate that into poetry. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, if you are hoping for me to say some poet, it
No,
mostly came from it came from literature. It came from reading short stories and novels,
I
more
love
so
that
than
answer.
poetry.
Sorry, I love that answer. Yeah.
Okay. I apologize if I disappointed you. My apologies, but that is the honest truth. It came from short stories. Like I said, I think of poetry to me is just rhyming prose. So whenever I approach poetry or any poems, I think of
Okay.
the story. Well, what story am I trying to tell? What am I trying to convey? And then I try to structure it in such a way where, yeah, it can be deemed as poetry, even though we can write in free verse and doesn't necessarily have to rhyme. There's something about the rhythm that I enjoy in poetry. So I approach it from a prose point of view, and then I try to mold it into a poetic structure. And in terms of how my writing has changed since I've been in China, ooh, well, yeah, I think the subject matter has mostly changed a lot. Before, I think it was more so fiction. I fictionalize things. I write a lot of things just about from imagination, and then since being here, I write more so from experience and observation. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I miss the old way. I miss the imaginative way. Like I said, I grew up reading fiction. I grew up enjoying that. That's what I wanted. I want to take people on journeys. I want people to imagine things. I want it to be vivid and visceral when you read. I don't want to just talking about my life. I don't think I'm that interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, cool.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Um, okay, I'll hold off. But Jacques, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can
yes, I can hear
hear
you.
and see
How are you?
you.
Wonderful. No, I loved your reading.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you.
I'm curious about the poem that divides your family, the the H marks poem. I took it to be about slavery, literal
Ah,
slavery, metaphorical slavery. Uh,
most people. Sorry.
yes, most people do.
Oh, do you want me to elaborate what it was
Well,
actually?
well,
So,
well,
if from your point of view, you thought it was
my
about slavery.
question, that's my question. Was it really is also. I really love the first step. I was moved by that one because your poems can your poems are capable of large gestures. And that poem I loved because it was also saying sometimes it's a small thing. It's just taking in a single breath.
Country.
So I'm curious about how you wrote that one. I really love that poem.
Thank you. Thank you for yeah, we're starting with the
Coming
first
together.
thing that you asked, etch marks. Etch marks wasn't about slavery. That was just one stanza in the poem. What I
Mm.
was actually writing about was the oppressor versus the oppressed. If you look at the different stanzas and you look at the different images displayed throughout the poem, you'll see that there are oppressors and the oppressed. My question was more so a question to the oppressors. Why do you guys do what you do and then seek to erase
Still,
what you've used up? Sorry?
No, that was just my computer. I'll announcing something.
So
I'm not.
So I say, it wasn't about slavery per se. It was just commentary on the oppressor and the oppressed,
Mm.
right? So if you, like I said, if you look at it, the part about Goebbels and uh, that has nothing to do with slavery.
Yes.
Um, yeah, with World War II, and then with McCarthyism and the communism witch trials, where they were calling people communists and people would get locked up. It was just about questioning the people who oppress. Why is it that people oppress other people, and then after they've gotten whatever they required, they seek to erase the history of those people. They seek to erase those people from sort of existence, like they never existed before. They've
Mm.
gotten what they wanted, and now is it out of shame? Do they erase out of shame, or do they erase because they don't deem these people as human beings? So that's what I was questioning. It was more so a question than anything.
Mm. Mm.
Um, yeah, that was the answer for that one. And then for the first step, um, like I said, it was actually inspired by funeral blues, W.H. Auden. You know,
Mm.
the funeral blues, Stop All the Clocks. That's where the inspiration came in. Because when I read that, Stop All the Clocks, I was kind of writing from the point of view of the person who's now departed. So he's left, having to get over passing
Mm.
of a friend. So now I was writing it from the perspective of the friend, saying, "Dude, it's time to move on. You need to live your life. I'm already gone, right? So
Like
it's
you've
time
ever
for
been
you."
with this, Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
Jacques, you good?
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions
Thank you
in
for
the
your
room?
questions.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Okay, if there are no questions.
Um,
Oh, there. Mary Edwards, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, what you had me completely captivated by your poem, Tepi. Um,
Thank you. Sure.
and, I'd like to read them again because there was so much in them, and so I hope they're coming out in a book, or have they already been published?
I did sporadically, like one or two have been published here and there. Hopefully one day I'll have a chapbook out. I don't know. I hope so.
You will, and
I
you
hope
you're.
it's too.
I mean, you were. I liked how you involved the audience by sort of egging them onto the Q&A, and yeah, it was a good a good tactic, but it worked. So the stained glass cup, you said you asked if we understood what it was, and again, I would like to read it again to see, but what came to mind was an abused woman. So yeah, it was like this container, this vessel that's just been thrown on the floor and trampled on and broken and kind of revived and broken again. But that's just what I
Again,
got
again.
from, but I'm sure I need to read it again to really understand it. But so I'd like
Yeah.
to, what you were thinking of.
Sorry. Sorry, I apologize. I cut you off there a little bit. My apologies. Well,
Oh,
was
okay.
that
I didn't notice.
okay? Would you like me to elaborate? What it was about actually. So I don't know. This is why I said you should ask me. At the, I wanted to say, have you ever written poetry and you wrote it such a long time ago that you can't remember the state of mind that you were in when you wrote it? So
Right.
I was rereading this poem, and I had been. That's why I included it in because I wanted to ask you guys. I reread it and reread it. And I felt nothing towards it. I felt so detached to it. This is something I wrote, and it feels like it feels like I don't know how to explain it. Having a child and then saying that you feel nothing for your child, because as poets or as writers, a lot of people say that your work is like your children. You put all of your heart and soul into it, and you let it out into the world and you hope that it will flourish. And when I read it again, I'm like, felt so detached from it. It's like I didn't recognize who the person was who wrote that poem and exactly for what reason they wrote it for.
Interesting. Maybe you
Yeah,
read something that like
oh,
about
yeah,
feminism, you know. I mean, I'm just
maybe,
on that
or
track.
yeah, my state of mind. I'm really trying to think of what my state of mind was at that time because if I remember correctly, oh, yeah, if I remember correctly, I wrote this in 2014.
Right.
I think it was 2014. So the person I was back then and the person I am now, we feel like two separate beings. So when I reread this poem again, for me, there's a attachment to it, but I can interpret it for myself in saying when I read it, it's not necessarily just an abused person, it's just people in general. How we we always hold fit a certain mold. We were all born pristine and beautiful the way that we are, but then society kind of tells us that we should be a certain way. So they break us. They break us and mold us and remold us and they turn us into whatever they think we should be. So there's this part here, who will fix him if he proves to be useless? It's this part where if you've ever felt depressed about the person that you are and you wonder, how will I ever, be okay again? How will I ever fix myself again? How will I ever be, yeah, okay? And then this part, who will save it from being shoved back into a furnace? Who will prevent it from being turned into a glass container, made into a mirror to reflect someone else's perfection? So this is kind of like imagine taking all of these pieces and then remaking them into something so different from what it initially was. So now I'm just reflecting what someone else wants me to be. So I'm no longer myself. And this part, perhaps he'll just be another stained glass cup, chemically enhanced. So, with cosmetic surgery, people put themselves through that process so that they can fit a certain mold of what society has said or deemed us to be. So, yeah, I think that's what I was going for. But like I said, I cannot speak for the actual state of mind. It was so long ago, 2014. My goodness, feels so far removed.
Yeah, but that's your explanation was good. You know, it's I think a lot of people can gel with that because it's like, living with the narcissist inside yourself. If you're
Right,
living,
exactly.
we are all kind of narcissistic in some ways and living with our own narcissism. Yeah.
This is so funny. I was thinking about this exact thing. When I was wondering if someone asked me, what is a writer or a poet? I'm like, well, or what kind of qualities do they need to have? And I thought to myself, you have to be a bit of a narcissist. You do, because ultimately, you're creating worlds. If you, any kind of writer, what you do is you create worlds. You are, in a sense, a creator. You have to have a sense of narcissism within you to be able to think what someone else might be saying or might be thinking. You are, in effect, creating characters and people. So there has to be a sense of narcissism within you.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd like a narcissist.
Well,
Yeah, but
you disagree with that one. Uh,
Alrighty.
I really think if you think about it, but yeah, I think so. I think we all have a little narcissism within us. If we all creators, you create characters, you create thoughts within these characters. Doesn't that make you a little narcissistic to think that you can think for someone else?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes.
It's a difficult one. Thank you, Mary. Y'all have given us some food for thought. Maybe God was a narcissist.
Created in his image, right? So
All right, I'm gonna leave that there and move on to Charles. Charles, you have a question or comment?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, there we go. Uh, I thought I was
Hey,
unmuted, and actually I wasn't unmuted, but now I'm speaking. So hi. Yeah, I was really moved by that reading. I really enjoyed the first poem to the last poem. So
thank
I really was quite moved by that. And yes, I I think poetry is another form where one does tell stories. Um,
you.
sometimes the stories feel more like a feeling or
Mm,
something like that. I mean, some of my poems have sounds and feelings, but they very indirectly tell a story. Um, but I liked your storytelling. That was wonderful, and the Drakensberg one as well, and the one after that. I really enjoyed a lot, but I enjoyed them all. So not really a question, but I dislike your idea of telling stories, and I didn't mind at all that you liked Goosebumps and what have you. I think they sort of brought the world of novels and literature to many people that otherwise probably wouldn't have enjoyed that. I worked as a librarian for 27 years, and certainly I help many people get into those kind of books and enjoy them and go on to write and all sorts of things. So that was wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Charles. Are there
Uh,
any other questions? Any other comments in the room? If there are no questions and there are no comments, we'll take a breather for 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, we'll come back and have the open mic session. So it's 20:35. So at 20:40,
And
we'll be back.
sorry to
Um,
interrupt, but Melanie or Melanie had a question.
oh, Melanie had a question. Okay. Sorry,
Yes.
Melanie.
Sorry.
Not
Yeah.
so much. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
It's not so much a question. It's more an appreciation of the thread in each of your poems, Chepi.
Wow.
The distinct beginning, middle, end, and guiding us through. I love the evocative phrasing. I wouldn't be able to comment on the whole poem, but there are certain phrases that always jump out and stay with me. And it's the kind of poetry that you've been reading I would need to read again and need to digest again, just to go to live through those phrases, that your cyclopean moon and father's destination was anywhere but here. It brings you to a point. So that's
Mm.
quite a masterful conducting of the orchestra. I thoroughly
Well,
enjoyed
thank you,
it.
ma'am.
So thank you so much for that. I think my favorite
Thank
was
you.
heliotropism. The
Really?
imagery was just so rich. So and some of it surprising, with your the wheats in pews in rows. It's
Yeah, the lace crops.
unexpected.
Yeah.
It was refreshing and unexpected. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. Oh, God, you guys are making my heart sing. Will make me cry today. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Melanie.
it.
Okay, I am gonna be away for a few seconds, get some water, and we'll be back.
All right.
Oh, I don't